Update 1.101 Raining Fire has been a pretty large patch for Naval, so large in fact that I've heard it called a Naval-focused patch by some other players. However, as 1.99 showed, not all patches with a lot of changes for Naval are necessarily good for Naval. So, is 1.101 a success or a failure? In this video I'll go through many of the major changes from the patch notes and give my thoughts on them. First is something that's not actually included in the patch notes, but is worth mentioning. Italy got a new reserve boat, the MAS 561. It's far better than the original MAS 555, taking Italy from the worst reserve boat to debatably the best one. The MAS 555 is still researchable, but I would recommend just not playing it. You can get 3 spawns in the MAS 561, and it's a significant direct upgrade. Next comes the addition of sea mines. Many different vessels received these, and they can be unlocked via the modification menu. Personally, I haven't noticed anything from them as far as ship-mounted sea mines go. They despawn rather quickly to keep them from being spammed in capture points and vital choke points. However, as a side effect, they are rather underpowered. Plane-mounted sea mines, on the other hand, have had a very large effect in air and ground matches, since they have absolutely massive amounts of explosive filler. Ironically, they've had a much larger effect than in non-naval modes than in naval itself. I'm personally fine with the underpowered implementation of mines in naval, since I think they would be immensely frustrating if added realistically. However, I do think they could use a slight buff to make them a bit more viable. The next change is that some AI-controlled cannons won't fire at aircraft. As far as I can tell, this change has only changed weapons like mortars that really shouldn't target planes anyway, so it seems positive overall. Mortars aren't really useful in War Thunder still, but at least they won't spam at aircraft that are a few kilometers away for minutes on end anymore. Next are some changes to specific ships. I won't go over every change, but I will mention the major ones. First is a change to the Graf Spey's HE shell, giving it, as Gaijin puts it, the correct explosive damage. As far as I can tell, they deal more damage, but the dispersion of the guns are so bad that it's hard to test the shell damage consistently, so the ship still isn't great. The IJN Ayanami got spare torpedoes, which makes it a bit better. However, it doesn't have long lances, so don't expect the kind of power that a Yugomo or Yudachi has from its torpedoes. The USS Cleveland got its main caliber turret speed buffed to be in line with its historic rotation speed. It's more reactive now, however the ship is still missing its anti-frag hull armor that's present on the Brooklyn. 203mm Mark 25 HC has been changed from HE base fuse to HE. This is a pretty big nerf to the American heavy cruisers, which were already doing terribly. Despite what the patch notes say, this also affects the Pensacola and Northampton. The number of shells before the Auto Melara cannon overheats has been substantially increased. This is a pretty huge change for any vehicle using it, making that cannon way more effective in prolonged engagements. The S-100's got torpedo reloads. This is a nice buff, and hopefully more low-tier vessels that had torpedo reloads get them in the future. Rudder speeds and angles were changed. Light boats and escort ships feel a bit more responsive and natural to control, and the change to heavy cruisers just increased their responsiveness slightly. Overall, I think this is good, as giving more direct control to the player tends to make for better matches. Fire mechanics received a massive change, with localized fires making a return and localized fires now being able to spread. This means a random destroyer shell across the map won't turn a cruiser into a floating ball of fire, which is pretty nice. I really like this change since the previous system was overly punishing. Hopefully we get more localized damage control like this in the future. Ammo stowage durability has been massively increased. This is easily the largest change in the whole patch for Naval. It has completely changed top tier gameplay. Now, rather than getting ammo shots, it's much more important to get Citadel shots to kill crew, and to damage the enemy's turrets so they can't return fire. I massively prefer this meta, though I can see how it's a large shakeup and some players may prefer the old one. This has come with many other ramifications. Now fire rate is significantly more important than per shell damage, since engagements are much longer and more shells results in more spread out crew damage. Some ships, like the British and Japanese heavy cruisers, can still get ammo detonations with good aim, but it is significantly more rare now. I would like to note that I was going to make a video based on HK Reporter's excellent write-up on how ammo detonations were too common previously, however college began very shortly after and I didn't have the time to. I would highly recommend looking through the post, and I may still make a video about it soon now that I have more time, even though Gaijin has already vastly improved the ammo situation. The PT-811 and PT-810 got their speeds changed, with the former going down and the latter going up. Now, they're much closer together. Overall, I dislike this on the PT-811 since Gaijin hasn't provided their exact source for the change, and everything that I've seen states that it's closer to the 55 knot top speed. For the PT-810, it's a nice buff that brings it slightly closer to the PT-811's performance, making it a lot more viable. The AFD-1, AFD-3, and HMS Kent got their heal and turning reduced. The only reason I mention this change is because it's funny to me that Gaijin grouped 2 artillery barges and a heavy cruiser in the same change, along with only including the HMS Kent and not the HMS London. I kinda have to wonder what's going on there. The USS Portland got its anti-frag hull armor removed due to a damage report made in 1945. All I'm going to say is that if we're using a 1945 damage report to nerf the USS Portland, I want the 24 Bofors that the USS Portland had in 1945. The PGH-2, PGO-2, and Spadavieto got their turning radius and speed retention in a turn improved. They needed the buff after the previous nerf to hydrofoil mobility, as that one was a bit too harsh. I would say that the current balance of mobility is the best, without them being underpowered like the last patch or completely physics-defying like they were before that nerf. One minor but helpful change is that the camera in the hangar has been changed with large ships. Now it's more of a thin oval that fits around the shape of the vessel, rather than fully spherical. I prefer the new camera since it makes it a lot easier to get close-up views of large ships, though it doesn't change too much. Many of the other changes to individual ships are visual. I won't go over these since they don't really affect gameplay, however they are good changes overall. Volumetric shells, while mostly changing things in tanks, have had a few effects in Naval too. Since many ships have very numerous internal bulkheads, shells tend to hit more of them and deal less damage by having a more shallow penetration. It doesn't really change much at all though, and the issues will hopefully be ironed out in a patch or two, so it'll be a bit more consistent. Next is a change to the graphics for fires on cruisers and destroyers. This makes them a bit more visually compliant with the new localized fires. Overall, they look pretty good. Last comes a bunch of changes to how sounds work. Without getting too specific, I like the sounds of cannons and AA guns firing, but I dislike the sounds of incoming shells for being a bit too ear-piercing. All in all, I think they're alright. I prefer them to the ear-destroying sounds a few patches ago, but the incoming shell sound is still a little too disruptive, and hopefully it's toned down just a little. Overall, I really like this patch. Naval feels far better than it did before this update, and I think lots of the changes show that Gaijin is listening to feedback. The most notable change is the end of the ammo rack meta, which makes fights much more extended. While this is mostly good, it has made the cruiser grind notably harder in my experience due to getting less kills on average in a match. Personally, my hopes for future patches are some increases to RP and SL gains, along with an increase to the maximum cruiser BR. If we get those, I think Naval will be in a very good spot for Gaijin to build off of in the future. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Naval content.